friends, it's Ramsey
and Camille,
and you're listening to the Hope That Helps podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Camille a little bit about foster care and infertility, but before then, we're just going to catch up with you. We are recording after a late night watching the Super Bowl.
Such a late night.
That overtime really put us into sleepy zone, but...
Yeah, what happened to you this morning?
Oh, I woke up a little late. The kids were to school late. We got to recording late. But we have our medicine ball drinks, and we're both dressed very comfy, matching again on accident. What's
Always.
new?
Always matching on accident.
Singing a little bit of Usher because, of course, we felt quite inspired last night.
Oh, I was so into the halftime show last night.
There's never been a time where I haven't been into Usher, so...
Yeah, Meme was looking at me like I was crazy. And then the song that she really likes came on, and she was like, "Oh, I love this song." And I was like, "You were saying Usher was trash."
She was being a big hater before.
I was like, "Okay, Gen Z, okay."
He also just released his new tour schedule, so I think that's something we're gonna have to explore for later this year.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Yeah, so today we are going to be talking to Camille about infertility and how that relates to foster care and their journey there, and some of the feelings around it, some of the complexities about fostering and also dealing with infertility at the same time. And so, I hope you guys will glean a lot from her today. I think that she's going to put out some helpful information, and if you're struggling through this, I hope you feel less alone and that she can help you. I know that that's probably your hope as well. So,
yeah.
As we get started, I just want you to explain to us kind of a little bit of backstory of what you guys have been through in the past couple of years first.
Yeah, so I guess you could say we've been struggling with infertility for about 4 years now. It's kind of a weird timeline because Zach and I were always of the mindset that if it happens, it happens. So technically if you want to put a long timeline on it, it's more like 6 years.
Yeah.
But as far as trying intentionally to have a child, it's been 3 to 4 years. And we started treatments back in, when was it? End of 2021 or summer of 2021. And, did some medication, did some other treatments. And after, I think it was probably 6 to 8 months after doing what we could at the time, what we could afford at the time, we decided to go ahead and stop and We decided to look into other options. And, if we got pregnant, we got pregnant. But our goal was to expand our family and open our home and have children in our home. And so that's when we started looking into foster care.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know something that has been hard is obviously the emotional aspect of this. And part that plays into that is something you've shared with me is that there's not really a rhyme or a reason to why you guys are potentially struggling to get pregnant, right?
Yeah, there were some hormonal things that were a little bit off. If I don't know if this would be TMI or anything, but as far as how your body works, there were times where I wasn't maybe ovulating, but it's all deemed unexplained. So the diagnosis is unexplained. So I don't have any kind of, PCOS or endometriosis, anything that they know of. And so it was very much like my doctor literally told me sometimes egg and sperm just don't meet.
Yeah.
And that was the last treatment that we went through. And I was like, is there any reason why?
Yeah.
It's not happening. And that's literally what he told me. And I was like, okay, this feels it almost felt like God was just hold back a little bit. You're trying really hard.
Yeah.
I have another path for you. And so we definitely believe we'll have kids one day, and we just feel that's not right now, and we feel like God wanted us to go a different direction.
Yeah. So I know that there's obviously a lot of harder feelings, like you said, and especially when it's unexplained and you're not really sure what your path is, and then you decide potentially on foster care or adoption. How do you explain the process that you went through emotionally to kind of bridge the gap between one thing and another?
That's really hard. I think that when we were going through this process, I was looking for stories like this. I was looking for how do people make a decision trying really hard to have a child and it not necessarily being a closed door? Because you think of when you move on to adoption and stuff like, oh, it's a closed door, like you can't have kids. And that's like not the case for us. We were just like, we can't really afford anything else and nothing's happening right now. And, you know, we're people of faith and we truly felt like God was leading us a different path and saying, stop trying so hard, like I was saying. And so for us, it was multifaceted. It was, you know, we can't afford any other treatments right now. We're kind of tired of doing treatments right now. Like it's a lot to put your body through. We didn't do IVF. We didn't go that far. But if you know IVF, that's like kind of the most intense thing you can do. But yeah, it was like we've kind of come to the end of what we can do and want to do. Also, the pull from feeling like God was telling us to move in a different direction.
Yeah, and when you say like you felt pulled in a different direction, I feel like you truly mean that in that like this wasn't necessarily an avenue for you guys to like get a baby or adopt a baby or maybe replace the feelings of having biological children with trying to like adopt really quickly or anything like that. I actually feel like you guys were turned more towards foster care and just the mission of like helping kids and helping families. And I don't want that to get lost, especially to listeners, of what you guys feel about that. But your desire to parent obviously helps you to like further the mission of foster care in a different way. Can you explain like a little bit more of your feelings around that?
Yeah. I think that there were a lot of feelings going into making this decision because on one hand, you know, you do want a child and that's kind of the whole point. On the other hand, for us, we work with kids, like we've talked about that a lot, and that's just where our heart is. We love kids, you know, we love being around kids, we love having kids in our home, we love your kids in our home. And so I think it was definitely more than just wanting to have a baby, you know, like that. Yeah. Honestly, we didn't want to have a baby. We didn't want an infant when we were signing the papers. We're like, I don't know. That honestly felt a little bit like, no, I don't know that I want that until like I'm having a child myself. And so.
Yeah, so you're like turned off a little bit to babies because like, you know, at some point you would like to, you know, biologically have children.
Yes.
And experience having a baby that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially since that's still up in the air.
Right. Yeah, I think it just felt more of like we want to open our home. We want to be in a parental role. We want to move on in this stage of our life. And if it's not happening biologically, then like, how can we expand what being parents means? And fostering and adoption has always been something Zach and I talked about doing. Like it was something we were on the same page about from the get-go. But, you know, it's always something you talk about and then like maybe you never do it. You're like, oh, that's a great idea. I'd love to help in that way one day. You know, and I'm not shaming anybody who's maybe said that. I think your heart's in the right place, but it really is a hard decision to like
actually
go to. Yes, because I think for us it was always, once we have our own children, then we'll do it. We'll feel like we've, you know, experienced parenting, you know, we'll be in a place that would be more where we want to be. And so I think it was a big shift going to like, okay, this is what we're doing first. And our experience having a biological child in the future is going to look very different.
Yeah.
And so, it was a hard decision. I think it was kind of, in a way, grieving like that natural order of things. And not maybe being able to experience having a biological child in the same way other people do.
Right.
Which now that's honestly something that I'm kind of proud of. Yeah. You know, like I'm excited about that. You know, if that happens while we still have Maymay in our home, like I think that'll be a really cool experience. But I think initially it's it was actually something to kind of grieve.
Absolutely. And I think if I could interject a little bit, even though I have no experience in this area, something that we've talked about in length on our podcast and being people of faith is like, both of us went outside of the ordinary timeline. I'm single. I adopted kids single. I was fostering single. And I always said the same thing, like, well, maybe whenever I have my own kids or whenever I get married or whenever. Mm-hmm. And I would just encourage you guys, especially if you're praying people, if you're people of faith, and even if you're not, like, highly consider, like, take your time and make sure that that pull that you feel towards foster care and adoption isn't something that's supposed to happen in the future. Maybe it's something that's supposed to happen now. And I would just like encourage you, like, whatever you think that timeline is supposed to look like, maybe challenge that a little bit and see if it's not your time now to step into something, because I will say that if you do that in the right timing, not just your own timing or the timing that you think, it's going to be better than what you thought.
Yeah.
So that was just like my little interjection.
Yeah. And I think too, like it was honestly like looking back, hindsight's 2020, looking back, we still are, but at the time we were very involved with kids and our work and our job and like this setting, where kids are struggling and their families are struggling. Like that was just something we were already in. So I think the fact that we just didn't think that was what we were going to do first, I don't know. It's just kind of funny to look back on now. I'm like, of course that's what we're going to do first. But I'm sure a lot of people of faith could say the same thing. But for me and Zach, planning our life has never worked out for us. Like,
no.
We were talking about this at lunch the other day. I was like, I feel like we've never been able to plan our life. Like, it's very funny when we try to do certain things because, like, God's just kind of like, no, that's not what I had.
And the Bible itself says men make their plans and the Lord orders their steps. So if there's anything, just know that your plans get crushed.
Right. And that's not necessarily me saying that I think like God has like stopped us from having kids. Like I still struggle with what I believe about that part of things, but I do believe that this is the route we were supposed to go. So
I love that.
Not sure how that all works in the grand scheme of things, but here we are.
We'll find out one day.
Yeah.
So I know that, we've talked about kind of this in future tense of like, oh, I wonder how you'll feel when you foster. You and I have had a lot of conversations about this. Like, how are you going to feel? And you're saying your intentions are here, or your emotional state is here, but like when you actually getting a kid in your home, what's that actually going to feel like? What are you going to be experiencing emotionally then, spiritually, all those things. Now you have May.
Yeah.
So how is that maybe changed your perspective on making this shift? Does it make you still desire, biological children? How has this process kind of shaped your view around your infertility, I guess?
It's actually been really interesting because the past couple months, the desire to have a biological kid has come on really strong. And that has nothing to do with May or our situation with her. Like, I think honestly, it's just reiterated that I really do want to have a child of my, that, I've given birth to.
Yeah.
I don't mean of my own, but because we claim May wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that the first few months, it like really took my mind off of everything.
Yeah.
Like getting in the groove of things, getting to know May, like really took my mind off of things. And I think now it's coming back up and I'm just realizing I need to address those feelings more and more. It's been good and hard. I think that in a way, it's helped me to not feel like I want to have a biological child as soon as it helps me to like assess more. Like
it humbles you a little bit.
Yes.
Like, parenting is really
yeah. And of course we jumped into the deep end. Like we have a teenager, you know, and we're 28 years old. Like we definitely went to like the opposite side of having a baby.
Right.
No one could ever tell us that like, oh, you just want a baby. Like, no, that's not why we did this. Yeah.
It's funny.
But I think also it's just done both. It's helped us to be patient, but it's also been like making me see more and more like, no, I still really want to have kids.
Yeah. And do you feel like, maybe not your desire to have a baby, but your desire to parent is like fulfilled a little bit in this experience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, Maymay's older, so it looks very different than having, even your age children.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely feel like it's fulfilling that because I have an extra purpose in my life.
Yeah.
It's filling that hole for sure. And so, in a different way, than having, birthing a child, but like definitely is still.
It's absolutely very different. Mm-hmm. It probably doesn't help that all of the people around us are having babies.
No.
At this point in time. I know that that's something my mom struggled with similar things. My parents did. And, they say that like you start to see baby stuff everywhere. And
I think I've wanted kids ever since Zach and I got married. That's not something we were holding off for too long. Yeah. But that's been a struggle.
Amplified a little bit.
I have to watch myself to not get bitter because like it's really easy. It's really easy to look around and be like, y'all have no idea how hard this is.
So it's not necessarily that like you said, your experience with Maymay or your experience in foster care is highlighting that. I think things are just amplified in general. And when you're looking for something, you see that something all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I do think it's funny because when my friends or people I'm around, my coworkers like sit around and talk about their babies, I'm like, yeah, my teenager did this. And like, I feel like I can't. I mean, I relate in some ways because obviously you're parenting, but it's really funny.
I felt like that at times too. My kids, I adopted them at 7 and 9. Yeah. So, there's a lot of things that my friends are going through or things they're going through with their kids. And I'm like, well, MJ will babysit your kids when they're my kids' age. Like, it's kind of weird. Because you don't really relate in the same way. People are talking about diaper brands and other stuff. And you're like, sure. We're doing algebra over here. Like, it's such a different experience.
It's very different.
Yeah, I know this experience hasn't been exactly maybe what you pictured as starting out parenting, probably not for Zach either. How has that been on y'all's relationship as far as infertility goes and having these big feelings and starting foster care, having to parent together? Like, what has that been like as a couple to experience so far?
Well, I guess I'll address the infertility part first. That's been really hard. I think in the long run, it's brought us together. And I think a lot of people maybe have the opposite experience. So I'm very thankful for that. Definitely does not mean we haven't had our fair share of like hardships or hard times. Like I think for Zach, he can sometimes shut off his emotions and like, I don't know what he's feeling about a certain thing. Yeah. And I'm a like verbal processor through and through. So like if I'm wanting to talk about it, he's like, yeah, I mean, it's okay. It'll just happen when it happens. And I'm like, no, this is awful. Like, this really sucks. And like, he feels that way too. I just think it was like coming together on our communication was like, it was a hard journey. And, we had to get therapy for it, not because we were, our marriage was in danger or anything like that, but I think it just brought up a lot of flaws in our communication, which we've talked about before in a past episode. But that was, I think it just squeezed some things out of us that we needed to address. And so I think coming out of that into parenting through foster care, that had helped us experience those things because we were already able to be on the same page as far as communication and stuff goes. So I feel like it's been actually a really good experience together. At first, it was a little hard because I think, because Maymay's a female, like I'm more responsible in that, or the responsible one. I'm not more responsible. The more responsible one because, I have to do certain things that maybe it wouldn't be as helpful for him to do. Yeah. And so because of taking on that load, I think we had to figure out like how do we share the load a little bit more. So that was a process, but I think we're kind of getting onto the other side of like figuring that out a little bit more. And Zach also understanding that like I can't do everything. Not that he wanted me to do everything. I think he was just going about his life, which I think is kind of potentially a normal dad thing to do.
Yeah.
Not that he's not a present dad, not that he's not helpful. He's very helpful in a lot of ways. But things like taking Mamie to school and things like that. I was just like, I can't do all this. Like I need some help. So yeah, I think we're in a really good place about it. And I think everything we've gone through leading up to this has helped to get us there.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Zach is great. And I don't want you to speak for him, but do you think that, how has his maybe view on your infertility changed? Has it changed? Do you guys have the same type of conversations you were having before? Like I said, your communication has gotten better, but are there some more big feelings? Like, how is he kind of processing through this? And again, I don't want you to speak for him too much, but, how has foster care maybe changed his view on what you guys are going through?
I think his view has changed a little bit. Like, I know having kids is still really important to him. I think, honestly, we're just now getting back to having those conversations again because we were just like in go mode for several months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, the past like month or two, it's kind of hit me hard again. And so I think we've had like, I can think back to one pretty heavy conversation that we had in the last couple months where it just like hit me really hard. And I think he is just really good at being focused on what we're doing now. Not all the time. Like he has his moments too. And I think that's hard because I'm just like, no, you need to be in these feelings with me. Like, why are you not in the same place as me? But I have to give him grace because he has other times where I'm like, I'm fine and he's not.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. I think that he is in a good place about it, but I know that even though maybe he doesn't share it sometimes, he still wants that too. Like he still very much wants biological children, and I think he still wonders when it's going to happen too. Like I think that's still a question mark for him too. He just copes with it differently than I do.
Yeah. I think one thing that, again, I don't want to get lost is like, yes, these are two very different journeys, and we've like said that like one is not a replacement for the other. One's not better than the other. Like they're just different. Yeah. It's different ways of parenting. It's different missions. But it's also okay to desire two things at one time. And I think that's where some of that like emotional conflict comes in is like, how can I desire this and also desire to do this at the same time? Because sometimes it feels like it conflicts. But I just want to encourage anybody else out there struggling, maybe like you guys are struggling, encourage you like, it's okay to like want to still have biological children and also be a really good foster parent or a temporary parent to kids that need your help or be support to families. Like you can do both. Like it's okay to feel that way. And I just want to say that because I know there's a lot of rhetoric online and stuff like that that's like very shameful of people who are struggling with infertility and also doing foster care and adoption. And I know that you have feelings about that as well. But
yeah, I mean, there's some states where I think they ask you to not, like if you've struggled with infertility, I think in Texas, I want to say, and maybe some other states, which I understand why they ask you not to continue to try while you're fostering, because it is such a hard emotional journey. Like I think that people do go into fostering wanting a baby, and I'm not necessarily shaming that, but I think that you really have to like check yourself, because it's not going to necessarily fix that. And I have friends that they have stories where, they have their babies that they're going to adopt and it's so exciting and that's fulfilled their desire for them. But for a lot of people, it doesn't. And I think it kind of is a shock when you're like, oh, this does not fulfill that.
Could potentially take away from your emotional ability to parent the child that you're adopting, which can be really tricky.
So I think in those situations, it's like it honestly prevents you from even doing that. But I think that can be really hard too, because that feels like an even bigger decision to be like, okay, I can't try to have children while I'm doing something that I find meaningful and like purpose in, So for us, thankfully, we don't necessarily have that, like, you know, we didn't have to have that cut off.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about your intentions too, and like making sure your intentions are right. And there's probably times when that gets muddy. It's like,
Absolutely.
oh, what are my intentions? Like, did I go into this with the right heart? And when it gets hard, you know, there are times when you're probably like, oh my gosh, like, what if we would have done a different path or whatever? Like, everybody has those emotions, and it's such a complex emotion. So I think it's hard for us to sit here and say like, oh, you should just divert onto this path and have completely different intentions and be perfectly, you know, set on, you know, this thing or that thing. And it's like, yeah, in a perfect world.
Yeah.
But it's nuanced. We're humans. And like you said, and maybe if you're trying at the same time, like it's even more nuanced.
Yep.
And that's okay. I also know that you've talked to May a little bit about this.
A little bit.
And you've talked to her about potentially having a baby in the near future or not so near future. How does she feel about that?
I mean, as far as I know, she would be thrilled. I will say, I think she honestly would rather us wait until she's graduated, which is not too far off.
She's close, yeah.
And so I think because that step in her life is so close, I don't think she would be I think she would be really excited.
Yeah.
I think, you know, she's like told us that she like prays for us, and that just
I love that.
makes me want to cry because I'm just like, you're so sweet.
That's really sweet.
Yeah, so I think she would be really excited.
And I think if your kids are old enough, now I don't know, you can speak to this. Do you think those type of conversations are good to have with them? Like, hey, you know, maybe we're trying to have a baby or you know, this might be a thing that happens in our home.
Yeah.
How would you feel about that? Even kids my age, I would imagine that conversation could be beneficial.
Yeah. I will say something that I hope set the tone for those type of conversations happening continually is that when we first met May, you know, she wanted to know a little bit about us. And I didn't go into depth about like huge details or anything like that, but I did tell her that we struggled with this, and that's why we moved on to choosing to foster. Among, you know, it's not why, but like...
It was the catalyst.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, I told her that because of these things that had happened to us, it made me very much feel that her being in our home was very intentional and like on purpose. And so
I love that.
I wanted her to know that like it's not because like, oh, we just like can't have our own kids that like we decided to do this. It's like, no, we feel like, no, there's a need, and if we can fulfill that need, then we want to. And so I feel like it helped open the door for further conversations. We don't talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think she maybe knows. And I just don't want her to feel at all that I'm trying to do something to replace her, or that if we do get pregnant anytime soon, that would be more fulfilling than parenting her, because it's like you said, it's two very different things. And so I try to be careful about those conversations, but I do think it's important to have them because I mean, if you have an older child, like that's already a stigma, is that people don't want them because they're older. And I think it's very important to make it known, especially if your heart's in the right place already. Yeah. Like if that's not why you got into this, like make it known to them. Like that is not why. And you might have to say it a few times. Like I didn't get into this just to like have a kid. And like I've had to tell May that several times. Like we knew your age and we said yes. Like if we didn't want an older kid in our home, then we would have said no. Like that's just how it is, you know?
And it's probably fear for them that it might impact their experience.
Absolutely.
Like, well, it's really good now, but what happens when you have a little tiny baby that takes up all your attention, you know? I think that's fear for most kids. That's fear for biological siblings, you know?
Yeah.
So I always think that conversation's good too. And I love the way that you've handled that. Even just hearing you talk about it now, it just is really awesome.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Sometimes I feel like it's not enough. Like sometimes I feel like I need to address it more, but I also want it to come up naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also don't want to put on her my emotions about things.
Right.
Like, I don't want to be like, yeah, I'm just really sad because my cycle just hit and like it just, man, period depression's real. Like,
that's what you have friends for.
Yeah. So I think in that way, I try not to talk about it too much because I don't, and she's probably listening to this, but like, if you're listening, maybe that's why I don't talk about it that much. But I want to be careful to not make her feel a certain type of way.
Absolutely.
You know, and so, yeah, but I do think it's important to have those conversations. Absolutely.
Well, if there is any other, advice to maybe a listener who's listening right now, who's struggling with infertility, or, maybe they've gone through treatment or they're at a crossroads where, maybe foster care and adoption's been on their heart, or maybe it hasn't. And this is the first time they're hearing like, oh, I could, in my meantime, help families. What would you say to them? What advice would you give? And you said that you've wished before that somebody would have shared a story like this that you could listen to.
Yeah.
So what do you wish that was shared or you could share with somebody else?
Yeah, I definitely think it's so important to prepare your heart before going into this. And that sounds so like,
churchy.
Warm and churchy and fuzzy and whatever. But it's so true. I think that if you don't deal with your feelings on this subject, you're going to go into this and you're not going to be potentially the best parent you could be. I think for us, the reason we did go into counseling is because we had gone through this hard thing and we were transitioning into making a decision, and we wanted to make sure that Zach and my's marriage was solid and that we didn't go into this just wanting a baby. And so I think that was really helpful for us to like take some time. It wasn't a long time, but I think it was a matter of like maybe 6 months or so, probably less, that we like made that decision and like went for it. I say 6 months from when we finished treatments and doing all that. Yeah, so just really preparing yourself for that transition is important. And also, you can do all the preparing and get into the moment and the feelings still come up. Like, it doesn't mean you're just gonna like fix it. Like, that's not gonna happen at all. But I do think that when those feelings come, you're gonna know how to like better handle yourself and handle yourself in front of your child.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's the biggest thing. And it's really hard. It's really hard to jump into just going to the next thing. Because for us, it was like, well, we don't just want a baby. Like, that's not why we want to do this. But it feels like you're just, I don't know, crossing this massive bridge over to the other side of things. And it's like, it's way more nuanced than that, you know? And you can go into the fostering process as far as almost getting licensed and you still don't have to do it. You could get licensed and you still don't have to do it. Like, I think that for us, that was something that we had to realize, like, let's just take one step at a time. Let's do the thing. And if we're not feeling good about this, then like we won't do it. And I think, again, being people of faith, that was a really hard journey to go on as far as like having faith about this, because you just want that like green light from God of like, yes, do this. And like there were definitely green lights, but you also just want that extra one. Like, can you just like have an audible voice that I can hear you say, go foster? Like, I think that was hard to not have those just black and white signs, even though we kind of did in certain ways looking back. But yeah, we had to take one step at a time. And once you're in it, like there are things that are harder experienced than just talking about. But there are other things too that it's like, oh, this is not as scary as I thought it was going to be. Like it's nerve wracking. It's a lot to take in, but I can handle this and we've got this. It's okay. So anyway, I would just say prepare your heart, prepare for potentially the things that you might feel going into this. Assess why you're doing this in the first place. And then also just take a step at a time.
Well, I think that's pretty good advice. Thank you, Camille, for sharing your story with us. I know that this isn't something that you've shared a whole lot with people. And so I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable with us enough to talk about this and to hopefully help other people.
Yeah, I think for a while I very much was like ashamed to talk about this because it feels like I'm not doing what I was created to do. And I've found that to not be true at all. And I want to encourage other people to not feel shame about this because it's way more common than you think it is. And there were only a few stories that I found where people were talking about the transition from infertility to fostering and adopting. And so I think that it was just really important to me to talk about this in this space. If we're going to have a podcast about it, then like we got to talk about why we did it in the first place. So I just really hope everyone that's listening and watching that you can gain something from this. If you have questions, like please reach out. I know that I was very scared to talk to anybody about this because like I said, I was ashamed and I felt like I was just, something was wrong with me. So if you have any questions at all, please reach out. Well,
hope that helps. Thank you for listening. As always, we're so glad that you are here. If you want to keep up with us through the week or see our silly videos, you can follow us on social media, on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, all at Hope That Helps Pod. We also have a new feature on Spotify called Listener Support. So if you want to throw us a little something as a donation over there, it will help us to keep the podcast going. If you're liking our content and you want to hear more of it, you can go check that out on Spotify.
Also, if you would leave us a 5-star review, that really helps to get the podcast out to more people. If you like this content, then we want to get it out to as many people as we possibly can. So please go leave us a 5-star review. Also, thank you to our production team, Eric Pardo and Zach Grimes. We love y'all. So thankful for y'all.
All right. Bye.